Andor is finally over, and it appears that Kathleen Kennedy's reign as the president of Lucasfilm might also be over. That's right, everybody. I'm back to making Star Wars videos.
You said that you would destroy this and not join them!
We've got a lot to go over in this video. I want to talk about the Kathleen Kennedy news. I want to talk about Andor and why it underperformed the way that it did. And then I want to talk about what the future looks like for Star Wars in the next couple of years. So let's begin with the thing that everybody's here for, the thing you really want to talk about, and that's Kathleen Kennedy. Is it actually happening this time? Is she actually stepping down? And I think freaking yes. But I want to explain why. Now, this all has to do with Bob Iger replacing Bob Chapek in a really wild move that happened over the course of the weekend. Was officially announced Sunday evening. Bob Chapek, just 5 months after having his contract extended and the board voicing a lot of confidence in him, was booted out unceremoniously, given a big fat severance check, told to shut his mouth via a non-disparaging clause agreement, and essentially kicked to the curb. Bob Iger, who of course had been the CEO before him, is being brought back. He is officially now the CEO of Disney once again for a 2-year contract. And as soon as this happened, people wondered what this would mean for all the executives at Disney. Obviously, there were going to be changes happening at the company, and a lot of people, including myself, wondered if any of those changes would happen at Lucasfilm. Specifically, would this move mean that Kathleen Kennedy would be removed from her position? Now, my initial speculation on this was fueled by certain insiders making comments that there was another person that the board was really upset with at Disney. This was hinted at by Steve Frosty Weintraub and several other insiders. And so for me, I was like, oh snap, that could obviously be Kathleen Kennedy. But it's absolutely fair that it was just speculation then, and a lot of us thought, well, hey, Bob Iger has a good relationship with Kathleen Kennedy, so if anything, maybe Kathleen Kennedy would actually be more secure now that Bob Iger was once again CEO. And on Monday, insider and scooper John Campea gave his thoughts on the situation. He actually did believe at the time that Kathleen Kennedy's position was secure and that Bob Iger would likely integrate her even more in the future plans for Star Wars. That was until, according to John Campea himself, two very good sources who he quoted as being 1,000% right on major things from the past told him that he was actually incorrect in that previous assumption. And in fact, the two sources told John Campea that the decision had already been made to remove Kathleen Kennedy, that she's essentially being moved out full stop and will be removed sometime next year, either slightly before or slightly after the release of Indiana Jones 5. And so I want to be crystal clear about this. We don't know for sure. This is coming from John Campea, but again, to me, this was already hinted at by a lot of other insiders, and a ton of people that I reached out to said she would probably be leaving sooner than expected. She's not going to, have her whole tenure of whatever contract she currently has. And so even though we got to take this with a grain of salt, I tend to believe this is the case because John Campea himself had to go on his own show and admit that his initial take was wrong and admit that something that he knew was going to make a ton of crazy fanboys and toxic Star Wars fans applaud like the frickin' Ewoks at the end of Revenge of the Jedi was going to happen. I feel like John would not have said this unless he knew or had very good reason to believe that she was actually being removed, because he knows what this rumor means to so many different people out there and what kind of a kerfuffle would be created online after he exposed this news. And I know there are a ton of Star Wars fans that for whatever reason can't quite grasp how bad things actually are for the brand of Star Wars currently, and many people out there that defend Kathleen Kennedy and think she's doing an absolutely incredible job. But I simply don't think that's the case, and I think there are many different reasons that the board would be really frustrated with Kathleen Kennedy. And during the time of the sequel trilogy, when a lot of these movies were coming out and still making a ton of money, there were people that saying Kathleen Kennedy's doing a bad job. And maybe then when a lot of people were upset about that, they didn't have as much of a point because Star Wars was outwardly very successful. Although I will tell you that I think the trending down of box office and of merchandising sales after the initial purchase and the making of the first few Star Wars movies was a really bad sign at how the brand was being handled. But I think now, years after the sequel trilogy has come out, it should be more apparent to folks that the Star Wars brand is truly suffering. Galaxy's Edge was considered such a failure at launch that they fired a female executive that was essentially put in charge of launching that park. The Star Cruiser Hotel is widely considered to be a failure, and at the time that it launched, a lot of the videos and the promotion that was attempted by Lucasfilm was covered negatively all over social media and even by many reputable journalistic junkets or websites. And of course, despite taking a 3-year break from making movies, multiple movie projects that were said to come out next year or even in the next couple of years have fallen apart. And it seems like Lucasfilm is still scrambling to try and figure out what they're going to do with their movies. And just a month ago, Michelle Rejwan was fired, and apparently a big reason as to why she was fired was because they couldn't get the movies made. And so if Disney is firing people associated with Lucasfilm and Star Wars product, you just have to understand that from the perspective of the board and investors, Lucasfilm is failing. I think even the biggest Kathleen Kennedy fans, like the people that want to defend her the most, would have to admit that at some basic parts of her job, she has failed, especially since The Rise of Skywalker. On top of that, when it comes to Disney Plus itself, their hit show, The Mandalorian, has been off air for 2 years. Book of Boba Fett and The Kenobi Show both disappointed many Star Wars fans, and I think from Disney's perspective, didn't get the views that they were looking for. And Andor, despite being liked by a lot of Star Wars fans, is the lowest viewed Star Wars show ever created. And so I get the feeling that the board has had enough of Kathleen Kennedy, and I feel that despite how Bob Iger might feel about Kathy personally, he's probably going to be pressured to remove her. And if what Campea is saying is true, that decision has already been made, and it likely was made in haste. And now the hunt begins on who Kathleen Kennedy's replacement is going to be. I'll save my thoughts on who I think could get this job and what this will look like towards the end of this video, but I actually fully believe that Kathleen Kennedy is actually gone this time, that a decision has been made, that the delays have finally caught up with her, and again, nobody is really left there defending what she has done. And I personally think this is long overdue. I think Kathleen Kennedy is really, really bad at her job, and I think finally rose-colored glasses are coming off for people, and people that even want to defend her can't excuse the lack of movies, can't excuse all the mismanagement of productions behind the scenes, and the way the brand is being presented outside of the movies and television via the parks, via highly expensive stuff, all of that kind of stuff. The brand is just in a terrible spot. But now let's talk about Andor. I did watch several episodes of Andor, and I watched the finale of Andor, and yeah, man, I still feel the same way that I felt after I watched those first 3 episodes of Andor, but I've also done a lot of listening to Star Wars fans as I tried to sort of navigate not making videos about Star Wars, trying not to be super toxic about Star Wars, but also trying to be authentic in the way I felt about this show when I'm on Nerd Theory or when I'm asked about it in streams. The honest to God answer here, like the true shit that I can say from my heart, is that I have an emotional reaction when I watch Andor. I very much dislike the show. Like, I would say I hate the show, and I know hate is a strong word. Maybe that's crazy, but every single time I put that show on, I get very irritated on what it is and what it is not. And I said in the video after I watched the first 3 episodes that I didn't feel like this was Star Wars, and I continue to believe this. And there have been various comments made by Tony Gilroy coming out in the press over the course of Andor that really made me feel like he doesn't like Star Wars. He's not interested in making something Star Wars. Like recently he said there's no Force or Jedi because in his mind, in the galaxy, it's so big that those ideas and concepts wouldn't be known by many people. So what I can say is that I really don't like Andor. It's one of my least favorite Star Wars things ever, and I really truly mean that. However, I want to sort of give a fair shake to some of the things that people say about Andor, right? Because I do agree that from a functional perspective, it's well shot, it's well acted. The writing of the show is good in the sense that it has a self-contained logic, and I do appreciate that. And I also do think that Star Wars needs to try to grow beyond what it has been doing for the last couple of years. It can't just keep returning to nostalgia. It can't completely rely on that and thrive as a brand. And I totally see that. And in some ways, Andor is trying to forge a new path for Star Wars. And I get that that's good, and I want Star Wars to do that. But I think they missed the mark with Andor because it doesn't include the mythic and mystical items and concepts that make Star Wars what it is. I don't think Star Wars has ever had particularly great dialogue. I don't think Star Wars has ever had really intricately woven plots. I think Star Wars really operates on this level of emotion, adventure, and sort of base level mythic storytelling, Joseph Campbell type stuff, and watching a singular character go through their hero's journey. That's what I think Star Wars is, and I feel like Andor rejects that. Even the way it is shot and the way it goes back and forth between characters and the content that is put on screen, none of it feels like Star Wars to me, so I really don't like it. Now, the question is, why did the show perform as badly as it did? I know there's some people out there that want to try to deny that the show is underperforming, but according to Nielsen chart numbers, all the data we have, and I think the move to put it on freaking ABC, Hulu, and Freeform, you can absolutely understand that Andor is underperforming to a ridiculous degree. Andor is underperforming to such a degree that depending on what money they spent on this show, it could actually be a major reason as to why they're finally pushing Kathleen Kennedy out. Now, really and truly, I can't tell you that all the reasons I don't like Andor are the same reasons that the show is underperforming. It's very possible that the story of why Andor is underperforming is more complicated than it just doesn't feel like Star Wars. Like, it's possible there's somewhat fatigue of Star Wars content on Disney Plus. And again, I think the Book of Boba Fett show and Kenobi show were pretty bad and just not of the level that fans wanted for Star Wars content. And so there could just be a fatigue and a reluctance to accept whatever the next streaming thing is that Disney's trying to do. So again, to me, the bottom line is we don't know exactly why Andor didn't succeed, but the real story here is that Star Wars is a brand that used to command a ton of attention, a ton of people checking it out. Other studios would move their shows or movies out of the way of Star Wars. Star Wars was the big kid on the block. And now Star Wars can put out a show and spend all kinds of money on it, and it will literally perform at the level of She-Hulk or below. And that indicates that there's a major problem going on with the Star Wars brand. But what happens now? What's going to go on with Star Wars? Is Kathy actually setting movies up? Will the person that replaces her continue making the movies that she wanted to make? What's going to happen with Disney Plus? There's a lot of different questions here. Let me give you my thoughts. So the biggest question regarding how Disney Star Wars moves forward is who's going to take the position for Kathy. And there's two options here. One is they hire from within. They take people from Lucasfilm that are currently already there, like a Dave Filoni, Jon Favreau, maybe even a Doug Chiang or some other producer that's lesser known but knows the business. If they do that, I think you'll more or less have a lot of the same. Perhaps Dave will make different decisions if he's the actual leader of the company as far as what kind of content do they green light. But conversely, if they hire an outside force, somebody else, somebody like Dan Lin, who almost just got the job of being completely in charge of the DCU, right? If they hire somebody else, that person will likely come in and bring whatever strategies and knowledge they have in the past franchises they have worked on and apply that to Star Wars. And I think the brand of Star Wars is at a place where the board of directors may well want the second option. They actually might want a fresh perspective and somebody that comes with experience of handling franchises well to come in and inject a new energy into the Star Wars brand. That is absolutely possible, and maybe even get a combo of that where you bring in a new guy, but you also have Dave Filoni. Something like that could work. And so it really all depends on what direction do they take take creative? What are they going to do with the movies, and what are they going to do with the shows? If they lean on Dave Filoni, I think they have a real chance to turn this stuff around, to forge a new path forward for Star Wars content in the way that it all ties together. And I also want to say, I think this story is developing. If this rumor from John Campea is true, we're going to know more about it very soon. You can't hide something like this, and Disney would be actively looking at somebody to replace her right now. Next summer is not very far away, and they want movies out quickly. So I expect that we'll hear more about this really soon, and I think we might even get an idea of what kind of a person will take over for her coming really soon. I'm personally really optimistic that removing Kathleen Kennedy and injecting a new energy into Star Wars will really help. I really personally like what Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau are doing with The Mandalorian. I'm really excited about the Ahsoka show, and I think they have some interesting movie ideas that they are trying to create behind the scenes. But make no mistake about it, the brand is on super shaky ground. I strongly feel that the board is really upset with Kathleen Kennedy, and I think her time might finally be at an end. Of course, let me know what you think about all the different points we talked about in this video. Smash a like on this video if you had a good time getting informed. Subscribe to this channel and subscribe to our live streaming channel so you have a chance to win the dope nerdy thing we give away each month. And if you want to watch more, why not check out this video I recently did about why Marvel Studios is introducing so many overpowered characters.